Hey guys, so I'm on a little bit earlier, although later as well. Later than I meant to, but earlier than I said I would. So some news just in. Prosecutor requests 5 counts to be dismissed in the Keegan Klein trial scheduled for January next year, right? So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at that. What I want to do is play a short clip, and I think what everyone is thinking about is pertinent. Was there a plea deal? And is the idea of a plea deal the reason why we are where we are? Is it because of a plea deal that Richard Allen has been caught? Was it some kind of deal between Keegan Klein and the authorities, given where we are now? It does look like that, doesn't it? So let's listen into a short clip from Fox 59. I'll put a link to that in the description, in the chat in a moment.
They are dismissed. He still at this point faces a jury trial in January. Daniel, you remember that we have been talking about this case because there was the potential of the cases, the prosecutor and his attorneys working together on a potential plea deal. We have been hearing about that. So I know you've been able to look at the court document here.
So, yeah, I don't think it's rocket science to say that. I think the tea leaves seem to suggest something like that, right? So that's the one thing that I think is worth pointing out before we go into the analysis today. The other thing that I think is worth noting is the feeling from the Carroll Circuit Court, in terms of what is happening. I'm sure many of you have already seen this, but let's just go through it. They're just talking about toxic and harmful insistence on public information. Concurrent to the actual case, the judicial officer keeps getting direct requests for public information. The public's bloodlust for information is extremely dangerous, and so on and so on. When the public peddles misinformation with reckless abandon, we all are not safe. Now, do you notice what is happening? A lot of what we've been talking about in other cases is now becoming part of the justice narrative, that they are worried about reckless speculation. They're worried about sensitive information, but in the hands of, I guess, YouTubers. In fact, YouTube is actually mentioned here. Where do they talk about YouTube? They say all defendants are presumed innocent. All public information will be available the second it exists. There it is. While this office is responsible for the entirety of the circuit court document, it attempts to ignore the maelstrom of interest from the public. It is known that YouTube already hosts content regarding family members of this judicial officer, right? That is quite shocking. That definitely is quite shocking. Now, I've got to say, for a change, I haven't really paid any attention to other YouTubers. I've just kind of been not feeling very well, so I've just sort of stayed in my lane and concentrated on my coverage of this case. And I must say it's been a relief, because there's so much stuff that you can get distracted on, right? So anyway, so we're going to deal with this whole idea of what are the residents of Delphi thinking in the aftermath of all this. What is their position? So if you look at this, this is such an excellent article. It's from the Indy Star. Delphi murder suspect Richard Allen, Indiana town wants answers about man who blended in, right? This is such a great article with great photos as well. Put that in the description. So that's kind of what we're going to deal with. We've sort of zoomed in. If you've been following the last couple of shows, we've zoomed into, in a way, the mind of Richard Allen and the web of intrigue around that. And now we're going to kind of zoom out and kind of get a different perspective, right? Let's do a quick poll here. Has anyone here watched the movie The Usual Suspects? So while we ask that question, let's see who's here. Stargirl, is it correct that only 3,000 people live there? Yeah, it's something about like 3,000 people. It's a small town. Mel Stiller, good to see you. SM Kovalinsky, Terry Dean, good to see you as well. John Hammer, thanks for that comment. Britscree, good to see you. Kelly, for someone with no criminal background to go from 0 to 100 like this makes me wonder if there's something else he got away with. I'm seeing quite a lot of speculation along those lines, and I don't agree. I think some people, have watched too much Jeffrey Dahmer, in my opinion. People are saying he could be a serial killer. I don't see that at all. Bear in mind the Chris Watts case. He didn't have a criminal record. Bear in mind, there's actually so many cases. People don't have criminal records and then they commit a crime. I mean, even a serial killer commits a crime for the first time. So, there's that aspect as well. What I think is true with that idea that you couldn't just commit a double murder. Remember, Chris Watts committed triple murder, right? And we're going to deal with how, again, the fabric of how that can happen with a real case, if there's time. I hope I'm going to be able to stay awake. But in terms of that idea, it's not that it's not like you go out tomorrow and you commit a crime. It's escalating tension. It's feeding a fantasy. It is a sense of diminishing agency over time. It's the slow creep of entropy and the slow attempt to wriggle out of that, right? That's actually what's going on. It's not just one day you go and commit a crime. It is the slow agitation, the slow stirring up of a lot of these negative feelings, and then they build up. They build up, and eventually it actually becomes inevitable. So don't make the mistake of fragmenting it like one day a guy went out there and he just committed a crime, right? It's a process. SM Kovalinsky says there's a lot of rumor, gossip, unfortunately, with this case since the arrest. And part of that is because you have this really unusual situation where law enforcement says, like, springs it on us, we're arresting this guy, charging him, and then we're going to not say anything, right? He's arrested, charged, okay, now we're not going to say anything else. And so what does that do? It puts the ball in social media's court, and what social media is going to play with that ball, right? So you can either allow that narrative to fester, or you can kind of contain it and say, well, these are some of the facts that are like common cause, that are sort of obvious. Anyway. Jody is cool. Good to see you. Michelle Rockhill, good to see you as well. Kelly says, I completely understand. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to deal with, in a way, the starting point of this whole analysis today is what Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother and guardian, said. For it to be one of us, it's hard, right? For it to be one of us, it's hard. I just want to look at the poll. If you haven't voted in the poll, make sure that you do. Let me minimize that. So far, how much credit does law enforcement deserve for solving the DELPHI murders? Most of you say a lot of credit, 10 out of 10. 43% say 10 out of 10. If you haven't voted, make sure that you do vote. Then the next most say 7 out of 10. So around about 70% give law enforcement a 7 out of 10 or higher. And then not many, about 30% give them less than that, like 5 out of 10. Very few give them 3 out of 10, 9%. I tend to agree with that they don't deserve 3 out of 10 because they at least caught someone. 3 out of 10 would kind of be if they didn't catch anybody. I don't know if I'd give them 10 out of 10 because it took almost 6 years. So I would put it somewhere between 5 and 7. Personally, that's my opinion. You may find that your opinion on the shifts as we go into, hi, Margaret Savinsky. You may find your opinion on what you would have voted shifts as we go through this episode, okay? John Hammer says an 8, okay. We'll come back to that, John, and see what you say. Mel Stiller says, not me. I didn't give them any more than 5 out of 10, okay. So I'm hoping to shock you guys, but not like in the typical way of being sensational, but in telling you a fact about this case that you may not know. And that may change your view on quite a few things. So we'll see what happens there. Do I have another image that I can bring up here? What's this one? So we're kind of going to deal with this man. I think his name's David Yoder. Can you guys see him? We're going to deal with him, and we're going to deal with a couple of other people that knew Richard Allen, and we're going to kind of get a sense of what they think, what they say, the local people. And then we're going to get a really unique sense of, in a way, why this crime, I think, took place. Okay, Carmel Hughes says 5 out of 10. Okay. Susan says, has justice truly been served? Well, that is the question right now. Is it being served? Has it been served? Will it be served? Right? So over the past few days, we've been zooming into the details of Richard Allen's life. We've looked at anecdotes from the brick and mortar pub, what work colleagues at the CVS pharmacy have said about him. We looked at a domestic incident in 2015. We looked at superficial perceptions of his demeanor on Facebook. We even caught a whiff of alcoholism and possible feelings of insufficiency in his backstory. We've orientated ourselves on the map of the bridge and how they likely sort of interacted and from which direction. In other words, we've been wandering around through the psychological trees, right? And I think we've identified some interesting psychology. We've identified some unusual sadism, perhaps a sense of impotency in his marriage, and possibly some of these feelings manifesting into a kind of twisted, depraved, and violent sexuality, right? So what we want to do now is zoom back out to get a better sense of perspective. And if you look at the image over here, that's David Yoder, but there's another image. It's not that. I'm just trying to see where I've got it. Where is that image? There it is. So what you're seeing in that image is basically a reporter going completely out of Delphi, I think 30 miles away, something like 30 miles away, to Mexico, Indiana, which is where Richard Allen grew up. So he's going completely out, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're going to pull out and change our perspective. And we're going to change our perspective by looking over the shoulder of various other people And then we're going to come back to Delphi, right? And then we're going to see if we see things in a different way. And the amazing thing is that we do, and how we do, right? So we want to kind of do a brief recap of what we know to get perspective on what we're dealing with. So it's a brief recap, but kind of via going somewhere else. We want to look at the person that has emerged out of the small town of Delphi, this person that arose out of Delphi, out of the fabric of this town. And that's the first aspect. The other aspect is when I look at the legal narrative, right, and the legal road ahead. And already we've got some symptoms there. It looks like there's a plea deal in the offing for Keegan Klein. How did that come about? I don't think it came about in a vacuum. So let's start. Remember, I said I wanted to shock you guys. Let's start by stating something obvious that you may or may not know, right? And I want you guys to be honest. I'm going to tell you guys something and tell me if you knew this or if you didn't. Did you know that Richard Allen worked right fucking next door to the sheriff's office? Did you know that? That where he worked, the pharmacy is literally right next door to the sheriff's office. So when he drove to work from home and when he drove back home from work, each and every time he would need to pass by the sheriff's office. So he would literally drive by the people investigating him. When he parked his car, it was across the road from the sheriff's office. Did you guys know that? So that should give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So think about that and the question, should law enforcement get 10 out of 10 or should they get a little bit less? So the guy they're searching for is driving by every single day and he is basically working across the road. And if you think that's an exaggeration, have a look at this map. So there is his home. And he would drive just a mile and a half, just 4 minutes drive to get to work, right? Following that route, then he would cross Deer Creek, right? Then he'd make a single left turn right by the brick and mortar pub. And there is the CVS pharmacy. Well, look where the sheriff's office is, right there. Right there. And it's directly on his route to work. It's not that he would take a different route. So someone says, do you think law enforcement was watching him? Well, it took 5.5 years to catch him. Do you think law enforcement were watching him? So this should make it a little bit more obvious. Let me pull this up. Can you guys see that? There is the county sheriff, and there's the pharmacy. Okay, and now let's look at one more map. The literal distance from the Carroll County Sheriff's Office is, do I have it here? Is it the next map? It's something like 0.2 of a mile. It's something like 1 minute by car, but basically 0.2 of a mile. .2 of a mile, right? So when he parked his car, it was kind of across the road from the sheriff's office. And I suspect this was the problem. We're looking closely at the map, but was that what law enforcement were doing? Were they looking closer or weren't they looking closer? Were they looking further afield? Were they looking outside of Delphi? Or were they looking towards Peru where Keegan Klein was living? Their man was actually literally right in front of them, right next door to them, someone they bumped into every flu and hay fever season. right? Now, let me ask you guys a question. Thanks a lot, Margaret. Thanks a lot for that. So let me ask you guys a question. Over a period of about 5 years, 5.5 years, 6 years, how often would you say you go to a pharmacy, right? Over 5, so the best way to think about it is in 1 year, how often do you think you go to a pharmacy times 5? So would you say it's fair to say you go to a pharmacy 6 times a year, maybe 10 times a year? If it's 10 times a year and you multiply it by 5, it's actually more than that, but that's 50 times that you go to a pharmacy. And let's say half of those times Richard Allen is there. That kind of means they could potentially see him there 25 times. And do they not think once that that could be him? Thanks a lot, Karina. Stephanie, good to see you. SW Firefly says once a month or so 60 times. So if you imagine that in a scenario, Richard is doing a shift every 50% of the time you go, well, then you've got almost 30 opportunities to see him. Does it never occur to you that that could be him? When you got that in your office, you've literally got that sketch in your office. That's a good point. We don't know what they knew. We don't know. I do think you've got to say if they knew something for sure and earlier, well, then they would have made an arrest earlier. I think you can say that, right? The search of Richard Allen's property was like a week ago, not like the first search of his property was a week ago, not 5 years ago. Is that a fair statement? It's not like they knew it was him all along. They've only just searched his property like a week ago. Okay. Songbird says, I think a digital footprint opened up answers. I think that's a fair statement. Carmel Hughes, thanks very much. I'm MCM says he doesn't look more like the sketch than anyone else in the area. But what about the video? What about the audio? What about the video and the audio? It reminds me a little bit about the search for Kylie Rodney. She's right there, but you can't find her. He's right there, but you can't find him. Right? Now, someone was saying to me earlier, I don't like that you're so critical of law enforcement. Like, why are you always critical? But I'm not. In the John Benet Ramsey case, I give kudos to the Boulder PD, and I feel like Steve Thomas wrote one of the best, if not the best, books on the John Benet Ramsey case, even though I don't agree with what he said there. I don't agree that Patsy Ramsey committed the crime. So I really support the Boulder PD in that case. In the Madeleine McCann case, I support the Portuguese authorities, not so much the British authorities, but although the cadaver search team was pretty good. So I don't know if it's true to say that I just never support law enforcement. I think it's great that they seem to have found someone here, but I don't really like the fact that he was right there and they've got video and they've got audio and it took 5.5 years. I don't really like that. Do you like that? And it's not really important what I think or even what you guys think, although I care what you think. What really matters is what the family think, what neighbors thought, what his family, his wife and child thought, and also what they didn't think. And so that's really the question: is how on earth did they think or not think that at someone in our midst? How did that happen? We sort of went through that, but we're going to go into that area in a totally different way now. Okay. Angel does says, I'm also quite shocked that it never crossed his wife's mind that the guy on the bridge could be her husband. Yeah. Maybe it did cross her mind, and then she crossed it off her mind, you know. Okay, so let's start our analysis. It's a slightly different approach to a previous video that I did. And we're asking this question: how do changes in perspective happen, right? So if you're saying, keepers, couldn't law enforcement just have changed their perspective? Couldn't they just have said, let's think about it like that, right? How do we change the way we look at things? How does that come about, right? So let's think about that. So in order for that to happen, you've got to move beyond the soldier mindset, right? You've got to go into this place, the scout mindset. You've got to open up your mind to possibly a different reality. But you're only going to know that you need to open up your mind if you kind of realize, wow, I've been fixated on one thing, right? There's a saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So if you're searching for a SO year after year after year and you don't catch the perpetrator, maybe you should try a different strategy. And we know that law enforcement did. To their credit, they said, we've changed our strategy and look where we are now, right? But how did that take place? I think part of that is we acknowledge I've made a mistake, or we're not looking at this right, or we're missing something, right? So when that happens, you kind of got to confront uncomfortable truths, not only about others, not only saying, I don't actually think these SOs are leading us anywhere, but then also about yourself and say, you know what, we've been quite stupid. Maybe we shouldn't have totally focused on that one line. Maybe we should have had a diversity of views, right? And that then brings us to this point where we want to go to Mexico in Indiana, which is where Richard Allen grew up, and get a change of perspective there. What happens when we do that? What happens when we're curious and we go there like this reporter did? So it says here, neighbors surprised by arrest of DELPHI suspect, Richard Allen, right? That's from this WTHR, right? So in a nutshell, I think the reason why law enforcement can get kind of lost, why an investigation can go nowhere, is because of this psychology in a nutshell. The evil is out there. It's not here. It's there, right? And if you think about that psychology, it's in so much true crime. In the John Benet Ramsey case, the evil's out there, that it came from out there into the house. It's not inside the house. And a lot of people believe that. In the Madeleine McCann case, the same thing. The evil came out there from Portugal somewhere, not from kind of the group of people that were there, right? There's so many cases where it's either someone close to the victim or it's some evil person out there. You sort of had that with Casey Anthony as well. Is it this dodgy babysitter that no one's ever seen out there, or is it something far closer to home, right? On and on and on and on, right? And I think there tends to be a sense that the evil is out there, right? And so as soon as you start thinking about that in a different way, maybe the evil's not out there, maybe it's around us, you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. SW Firefly says people tend to be so friendly. sorry, I lost, in Midwest small towns. I'm not surprised they were in denial that it was a local. That's quite an interesting point. Where you say friendly, I would say nice, and I think they would also say nice. Okay. Yeah, it does seem like that is generally the case. Often in crimes, it's someone that they know, right? It's kind of the cliche. Okay. So a Fox 59 reporter said yesterday, I think it's this guy, that he spoke to several people who knew Richard Allen, and all of them said they would never have suspected him. Why is that? Why would they not have suspected him? Is it because Allen was a smooth criminal, a super strategic, incredibly charming, super smart sociopath? Was he like a kind of a Hannibal Lecter of Indiana? Is it because Allen was super slick, or because the townsfolk in Delphi were sort of, in a way, programmed? They programmed themselves to believe he's not one of us, right? Now, you might say, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? A town programmed to think a certain way? What on earth are you talking about? You're not even from America, right? But give me a moment to say what I mean by that. That simple psychology makes it a cinch hiding in plain sight. So, in other words, from Richard Allen's perspective, from the perspective of someone who wants to hide in plain sight, anybody or a community saying he's not one of us, thanks a lot. Great. So I can move in and out, and I don't really have to worry because you convinced that someone from somewhere else. Thanks a lot. You've just done me a favor. Wow. Thanks a lot for that. Right? So you don't have to hide when no one is looking, right? You don't have to hide when no one is looking. If people are looking for a perpetrator somewhere else, then you find then you the safest place you can be is in Delphi, right? Or when everyone is looking somewhere else for an obvious criminal, well, then just stay where you are. So can I say that true crime tends to be about subtlety? Do you guys agree with that? The John Benet Ramsey case has subtlety. Madeleine McCann, super subtle. Casey Anthony, subtlety. Obvious things are hidden. Hidden things are often forgotten. It's quite difficult to get to those subtleties. You've got to concentrate. You've got to immerse yourself in the case. A lot of those things don't come to the surface easily, and you need days and days focusing just on one case. And even then, you've got to try and concentrate to hold on to those threads, right? In the Kylie Rodney case, all of us failed to find Kylie when she was right there. Again, arguably in the most obvious place. Why? Because there's some subtlety to the landscape, right? We want to blame someone, we want to blame that person or that person, but did you know where she was? Did I know where she was? Did anyone know where she was immediately? Well, that's because that subtlety defeated virtually everyone for a while, right? In other words, we are not very good at looking into the unknown. We're not very good when we're faced with a new fabric that's unfamiliar with us and kind of going, okay, well, this is what's going on here. We're not very good with the unfamiliar. We think we are, but we're not really that good at it. When we don't know something, it seems that reality easily eludes us. Now, you may say, no, it's not true. But look at this case. The police don't know who committed this crime. And the reality is someone that could be connected to it's like right there. and they just don't know that. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Okay. Pauline Buckles says, hi, Yvette Kelly. Pauline Buckles says, if you grow up in a small town and don't leave, you accept everything you see, hear, and know as your own values. Yeah, I mean, you don't really learn. I don't know if you learn to second guess or think that critically. Everything is, you think you know everything. The cat ate my homework says CVS isn't the only pharmacy in town. So I think what that's suggesting is that I suppose you can make the argument that I guess you could make the argument that Delphi is a big town, and how were law enforcement supposed to know? I suppose you can make that argument. I'm not trying to make that argument. I'm trying to make the argument that with a town of 3,000 people, couldn't you or shouldn't you have investigated the radius first? Obviously, it's easy to say that in hindsight now, but isn't that really what you would need to do, right? Yeah, it is so close to the sheriff's office. Shall I bring up that map again? There it is. So I don't know about you, but when the family friend says he knew Richard Allen, this is David Yoder. It's not Yoda, it's Yoder, Yoder. When he says he knew Richard Allen and there was nothing about him that gave him away, I don't know why it makes me angry. Was there really nothing that gave Allen away, or were folks around him just not paying attention, not thinking critically? So I want you to think about that. Was there really nothing that gave him away? Because if you think about it, something did give him away because he's been caught. They found something, so something gave him away. Liz Graham said, did somebody suggest his wife could have reported him? Well, no. What we've suggested is that there could have been a plea deal, and it might actually have something to do with Keegan Klein. He may have provided some intel in exchange for. So I don't know if you guys know this, about a dozen charges have been slightly sweetened in a way. So I think it went from level 4 to level 5. Level 5 is weaker. So he's had some charges dismissed, but other charges, about a dozen of them, kind of weakened, if that makes sense. Like now. Okay. So I'm going to play you a clip of David Yoder speaking, right? So this is from Fox 59. And he says the following. He says, people change over the years, and I haven't seen Ricky for a long time. And he was all-round good. He sort of swallows hard. And then he changes from saying he was a good guy to a normal everyday family. It kind of is a little bit garbled. He says he was all-round good, and then he says normal everyday family. Then he says there was nothing out of the ordinary about him. Okay, listen to this. This is from Fox 59. I'll put a link in the chat in a second. Okay, there we go.
He was all around good, normal, everyday family. Yeah. There was nothing out of the ordinary about him.
Before moving to Delphi, he...
Okay, so I actually think there's a clue in that. I think there's a clue in what, as I say, true crime is subtle. I think there's a clue in that offhand statement. There's nothing ordinary about, sorry, there's nothing unusual about him. What does he say? There was nothing out of the ordinary about him. I think he's trying to say there's nothing, there's no red flags. Um, there's nothing evil. There's nothing that made, but there's actually already in that a subtle clue to what we're talking about. Okay. So there was actually something out of the ordinary about him, right? He wasn't arrested and charged with an extremely unsettling crime because he was good or normal. But there may have been some truth to the idea that because he was so ordinary, he wanted to break out of the ordinariness. So can you see how what this neighbor said is actually telling us something? He doesn't know it. He's telling us something that is really insightful. He's saying, this guy was ordinary. There's nothing unusual about him. And maybe that's what he didn't like. Maybe he felt trapped in that ordinariness, right? Anyone see this movie, The Usual Suspects? Now, if you've seen that movie, then you know that it's sort of about hiding in plain sight. It's a guy who's literally being interviewed and they're looking for someone. They don't realize that someone is sitting right in front of them. It's actually based on a true story, right? And of course, the guy sitting in front of them comes across totally ordinary, right? In other words, ordinary can be a disguise, but ordinary can also propel you into something. Like you might go and climb Mount Everest because you feel like you want to do something extraordinary with your life. Your life is so ordinary. You want to have some exciting experience, right? So excessive ordinariness may be like a cage that you try and deal with in some way. Jenny says, love that movie. Yeah, there's a twist at the ending, right? Okay, so I wonder if I can play you this moment from The Usual Suspects. And the reason I want to play it for you is just so that you see the shift in perspective. Okay? Just so that you see the shift in perspective. Okay, let's do it like that. Thanks a lot for that, Liz Graham. Thanks a lot. Okay. So I don't want to play too much, but let's just play a moment here. This is from The Usual Suspects. I'll put a link to this in the chat. It's really worth watching.
Man, you're a slob.
Yeah, but it all has a system, Dave. It all makes sense when you look at it, right? You gotta, like, stand back from it, you know?
So that's quite clever in terms of the script. The guy says, it all makes sense when you look back. And so that is exactly what he does a moment later. He looks at the wall and he starts putting things together, right? And that's the same with Richard Allen. It starts to make sense when you take a step back. And that's what we're doing here. And you start seeing ordinary things that kind of stand out. I don't know if you guys remember, what is that guy's name? Yogahashi, or I don't know, the bottom of the guy's cup was something that was part of Kaiser Soze's story. Can't remember. Kobayashi, that was it. Kobayashi, I guess, made the cup. And so he's seeing all these ordinary things and he kind of puts it together. Well, we need to do the same thing, right? Except with the reality fabric, right? Kobayashi, that's it. Okay. Some people here definitely know that movie. Okay. So David Yoder kind of continues to speak, and he says, I mean, I would never have thought, lived across the road from him, anything. That's where I sent my kids to if there had been any trouble. So he's trying to say, wow, I actually can't believe that I never thought about it. It's this moment here.
Yeah, I mean, I would have never.
This moment here. How do I move this over? Okay.
Living across the road from him, if there's anything, that's where I would have sent my kids to, if there had been any trouble.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I kind of cut off where he said, I would never have thought, right? But anyway, he says, I would never have thought, and then he says something else. He says, it's just hard to believe. He's a heck of a nice guy, always has been. I want to put that in the chat. I don't know if you guys have noticed the word nice is starting to come up. He's a nice guy, right? So to Yoda's credit, he admits questioning whether he really knew Alan, and the reporter even says this. And this cuts to something that I think is very common in families, in communities, in ordinary relationships. How well do you know yourself, let alone someone else? When people go and climb Everest, do they realize, wow, I'm actually more of a baby than I thought I was, or I'm a lot less tough than I thought I was? Maybe I'm tougher than I thought I was, but maybe I'm not. How well do you know yourself? And then also, how well do people know you, right? So this is where he says that. Let me just do this. Okay. Again, this is from Fox 59, great reporting from them. I'll put a link to this in the description. So let's just do that, and then listen carefully.
It's just hard to believe. He's a heck of a nice guy. Always has been.
Okay, he's a heck of a nice guy, always has been. What does that tell us? So that's a link to that full interview. What does that tell us? He's a heck of a nice guy. I can't believe it. So interestingly, the Fox 59 reporter also reiterates this notion of not just Alan, but his family being nice people, right? And then I'm not going to play this. It's from the same thing. But another neighbor basically says, her name's Cheryl Sherry. She says, I don't know how his parents could not know, right? Well, Cheryl, to be fair, there are signs that he pulled off the nice guy act, not only with you and with David Yoder, but with his own wife and child. They also thought he was nice. So with his own family, and with the entire town of Delphi, who also thought he was nice, including the cops who also thought he was nice, and the victim's family who also thought he was nice. So can you see the nice aspect is clearly important? Follow me with this because it's quite important. Follow me with this. The nice guy aspect is central not only to why they couldn't catch the Delphi killer, right? They couldn't catch him because he was nice, but also why the Delphi killer came into existence. That's part of the ambit of this episode. That's why it's in the title. But why is it important? Why is this nice aspect important, right? And that brings us to this excellent article from the Indy Star. Delphi murder suspect Richard Allen, Indiana town wants answers about the man who blended in. Why did he blend in? How did he blend in? Well, because he was nice and it was a nice town. And The townsfolk were nice. But what does that mean? What does that mean? Thanks a lot, Liesel McGuire. Trying to find your super chat. Wow, yes, he is very verbal, fitting in and making people even feel sorry for his ordinary mess. Yeah. Okay, so look at this this heading. They want answers about a guy who blended in, right? This is one of the people that's photographed in that article, Tom Brower. And he said, people in this town want answers. This is another person from Delphi, also in that same article, Betty Cummings. She said that she'd been helped by Richard Allen at the CVS where he worked. I wouldn't be surprised if she said, I thought he was nice. So is it fair to say, because Delphi is a nice town and Richard Allen is nice, that nice people would not and could not imagine anyone from their town being not nice? In other words, I'm giving you kind of kindergarten language here. It's a nice town, Richard Allen is nice, and nice people would not imagine anyone from their town being not nice. In other words, something happening that's not nice must come from somewhere else. Is that a fair statement to make that? I know it sounds simplistic, but let's go down to this definition of nice. How do we define nice? Now, I must warn you, from this point onwards, you may not like what you're about to hear. We're going to talk about what is nice. What does it mean when you say nice people? What I'm about to get into may make you a little uncomfortable.
New Vex, first offense.
Right? You might feel a little uncomfortable when we deal with this. Are you prepared to go with me into that area? Are you guys ready? Are you ready to sort of gird your loins? Right?
Are you sure you want to hear this?
Are you sure you want to hear this? I'm not from Delphi, and I'm a newcomer to this case, so it's possible I'm totally off base, but my sense is that nice people are people like yourself. You're nice, I'm nice, we're all nice together. Looking at the demographics of Delphi, I noticed a few things that sort of stuck out. Again, it's not one thing that's particularly odd, it's a few things that sort of come together to create a particular pattern and a particularly idiosyncratic pattern, right? And although I found quite a few things, I'm not going to highlight all of them. I will just highlight a couple, one or two. The first thing to mention is the racial makeup of Delphi is 92.5% white. Again, we're asking the question, what does it mean to say he's a nice guy and it's a nice town, right? So that's the first point. The second point is a large proportion of the population is Catholic or otherwise God-fearing. I think the statistic of Christians is something like 38%. Yeah. So at the risk of being simplistic and reductionist, you might interpret nice in the sense of you're nice if you're just like me. Does that mean, well, you're white and you believe in God? Is that what that word actually means? Right? As I said, this might make you a little bit uncomfortable. So Richard Allen didn't need to be a master criminal in the class of Kaiser Soze from The Usual Suspects. All he had to do to blend in was to be nice. And he didn't really have to be all that nice. He just really had to, you know. So the amazing thing is, while Richard Allen fooled everyone in Delphi, including his auntie, even amateur sleuths were quick to notice, well, he seemed kind of dour. He kind of seemed quite unsmiling on Facebook. In other words, does he really seem that nice? Does he really seem that nice? Also, superficially, his appearance as a short, stocky male with an interest in hiking and someone who likes to wear hats, it was actually a match for the Bridge Guy video. And sketches of Alan are also fairly close to what Alan looks like, right? You might say that doesn't look like him, although the eyes and the mouth are actually quite accurate, and actually even the hair. But that is definitely quite close to that, isn't it? But because Alan is nice, superficially nice, he doesn't deserve further scrutiny. Well, of course he did. Of course he did deserve further scrutiny. So what I love about that article is it shows this image is also from that article. But what I love about that article is that you see this sort of image. It's from the Indy Star. And you can, what this captures is exactly what is happening. Let me do that. People walking by these posters every day. What are they thinking? Well, he's somewhere out there. He's somewhere out there. He's not somewhere here. He's somewhere out there. Someone came from, I don't know, somewhere out there, an outsider, and hurt our community. So can I just say, there's something for me, Stephen King level weird, about the most evil person in a small Christian town. When I say that, I'm saying this perception. There's this idea of the most evil person in a small Christian town is working in a store that's all about trying to heal and soothe sick people or ailing people. In other words, the person that is not the only one in charge, but who has kind of the responsibility to help sick people get better, is like the most sick person in that town, but psychologically sick. And you can also imagine, like if you imagine how many times you would go to a pharmacy in a single year for hay fever, which happens once or twice a year, for flu season, which same thing, for whatever, some aches and pains. So you might go 5-6 times a year, and guess who's there? And you're asking someone for medication, and he could be a double murderer. And are you going to trust him with your medication? Are you going to trust him with your personal details? Or are you going to share with him the progress of your investigation? So the cops going into the pharmacy, still ruminating on the case. Maybe even they've got a headache because they've been working late trying to figure it out. They go to the pharmacy, it's right there, and there he is. And he's handing them a prescription, or he's handing them their medication. And they are completely and utterly blind. Or let me put it this way. It's like the sickest person in a small town whose job is to try to make less sick people feel better. But he's the cause of the sickness. It's a classic case of the fox guarding the henhouse, right? And I was trying to find a cartoon or something to address this irony, because it really is ironic. And I found this, it's not quite the same thing, but it's this idea, can you guys see that? It's this idea of, this is a movie scene, movie set, and all they need is a guy who looks like a cowboy walking across the road. And that's all they need. And there's a professional, a guy called Warren, and his job is just to walk across the road on a cowboy set, right? He's a professional Western movie background street crosser, right? And you kind of get that idea with Bridge Guy. He's a professional blender inner. He works in the pharmacy and nobody notices him. He looks the part. He acts the part. He's kind of the Delphi version of Verbal Clint in The Usual Suspects. So do you guys see that? How this idea of a nice town full of nice people, well, you're not going to look at any of the nice people in the nice town. Well, thanks a lot. You made my life a lot easier. So that brings us to the next point. The nice guy aspect is central to why the Delphi killer came into existence. Think kind of laterally when I say that. What do you think I mean by that statement? The nice guy aspect. So the first thing we spoke about was why you can be blind is because you feel like, well, we're a nice town and he's a nice guy and she's a nice lady and we're all nice. So you don't notice anything. But what about the other side where you live in this nice fabric, but maybe you're not so nice? What can that feel like? Maybe you're from a nice family, but you got some not so nice ideas. What can that feel like? Maybe you're in a nice marriage, but you don't really feel like being all that nice all the time. Maybe you've got nice in-laws and they expect you to be nice, even when you're not feeling like playing nice, right? Okay, you follow where I'm coming from. So what weakness was Alan exploiting? What weakness was he exploiting? So are you guys familiar with that statement, the fox guarding the hen house? It means a person who's exploiting informational resources that they've been charged to protect or control, right? So I was a little surprised when the press conference in Delphi was held in a church. It's another little subtlety that you could say that doesn't mean anything, but that actually spoke volumes. The reason I think it is so ridiculously easy for Richard Allen to hide in plain sight, to work right beside the police station, was because of a deeply embedded psychological hypocrisy. I'm not saying the people are hypocrites. I'm saying it's a kind of psychological hypocrisy, which is different. So it's this, the false assumption of an appearance of virtue or religion. In other words, you make false assumptions because of someone's appearance. Do you follow? You're making a false assumption that someone's nice because they're part of your town, just because they're a resident, really, because they work in a pharmacy, because they have a job. We are all nice people, so the only person who could have done this is not nice. That thing, so they can't be from around here. That turned out to be a false or flawed assumption based on appearances. So let's go back to this. So how can, and this is another image, I think, from that article. There you see Tobe Leesenby, the sheriff of Carroll County, and he's looking at Bridge Guy right there on the, what do you call it? On the filing cabinet. Can you see it over there? There it is. He's looking at that every day, but his office is like across the road from the pharmacy. And I don't know, in a way, his office reminds me a little bit of The Usual Suspects. If you go and stand on the other side of the desk and maybe look through the window, you might see something, right? I don't mean that in a facetious way. I mean it like that's exactly what this case may be needed after year 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? How can being nice be enough to defeat scrutiny across 3 perspectives? You might say, this is all garbage. I don't know what you're harping on being nice about. But think about it from this perspective. Being nice, and let's take it through, bridge guy fooled his own wife and child. How? Well, he was being nice. They thought he was nice. Bridge guy fooled the victim's family. Well, how did he do that? Well, he was nice. He gave them photos that he developed, and they didn't need to pay for it. He was nice, so surely he couldn't have done anything. Bridge guy also fooled law enforcement. No, we're not going to investigate him. He's nice. So I put it to you because at each and all of these levels was this idea that we're nice and the perpetrator isn't. So he can't be from around here, except he was. Someone who seemed nice but wasn't. That's exactly what David Yoder said. I thought he was nice, but maybe I was wrong. So while all of this is comfortable and reassuring, we're in a nice community that is too nice to suspect anyone local. The nice guy act can also be crushing when it's all about keeping up appearances. So the one side of the whole being nice thing is you don't really have to work so hard to hide because everyone's nice and we don't have, but the other side is, what if you want to cheat on your wife? What if you want to buy a sports car? What if you don't want to go to church on a Sunday? What if you, I don't know, all the ways that maybe you are not in the traditional role of being nice? What do you do with that? Do you just hide that? Do you just not do that so that you fit in? Or do you start feeling a creeping sense of frustration? Think about being unhappily married, but trying to play nice to in-laws and keeping up appearances to everyone watching, like the neighbors or a waiter. It can feel like a cage. It can feel like a mouse in a mousetrap. It can feel like you've got the life being squeezed out of you. Trying to be nice, like Chris Watts was, I guess, trying to be nice, and be acceptable to a nice community can actually be stifling if you're the wrong kind of person for that, even if you're the right kind of person for that. Especially if you start to find, well, I'm starting to have inappropriate thoughts or ideas. Being nice all the time can make you feel impotent. And I actually had a conversation with some people when I walked my dog, and they were saying, marriage is so unrealistic. And all three of them were girls, and sort of between 20 and 40 years old. And they were saying, marriage is so unrealistic. How can you be in a relationship for 50 years, like with one person? And I said, if you'd said 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that maybe what's normal now is that you have 4 or 5 serious relationships in your life, people would say, that's not right. You are not you need to just marry one person. And so someone who said, he's inappropriate, he's not nice, be careful of that guy, right? Trying to be nice and be acceptable to a nice community can feel stifling. Chris Watts did that, and he was the golden child of his family. Scott Peterson did that as well. Because nice is so important, because everyone is playing nice and being nice, anything not nice must be hidden, right? If everything is nice, then something that's not nice, well, you've got to go to quite a lot of trouble to hide that away. That's a good point. What does Susanna say? We are nice, we are shallow, we don't know each other. Yeah. And so this whole nice thing kind of becomes a charade. There's also being nice on social media. I'm nice, I'm very nice, look how beautiful I am, everything's nice. What's actually going on? And that can create a second face, a second identity. We saw it with Gabby Petito. There's a movie right now about that whole idea. It's in the title. And so this whole nice thing means it can actually drive be the driving force for a second identity. Not only that, but a skill at deception, where you feel like, I can't reveal this thing that's not very nice. I've got to hide it away. And so you become quite skillful at it as a liar and a manipulator and hiding in plain sight. A skill at pushing down the not nice face and a skill at keeping dark things hidden and secret. Do you see how just through this word nice, you suddenly uncovered this whole area in terms of this case? This is how not nice may emerge in the darkness, in the shadows, beyond the spotlight and the stage where everything is warm and fuzzy. In other words, where everything is nice, something that's not nice may fester and brew and develop and aggregate, right? Interesting, isn't it? Okay. So we can also see now how being nice is a kind of acting, a kind of being on stage. And so why wouldn't that psychology of staging be part of the crime scene? Let me say that again. Being nice can become like an act, kind of like you're on stage and you must say certain things and not say other things. And so why wouldn't that psychology of acting and staging and being on stage, wouldn't that be part of the crime scene? And that brings up a question. Do you think the staging of the crime scene made things look worse than they were so that you thought it's an outsider? Or do you think it just distorted things? Maybe it made it look not as bad as it actually was. I don't really know the answer to that. I just have been thinking about it. Did the staging minimize the crime, which I think it usually does, or not? I mean, think about the John Benet Ramsey case. That staging made it seem much worse than it was. In the Madeleine McCann case, that staging, I believe, made it look worse than it was. So staging is part of the fabric of this guy's everyday life, right? So I want to take you guys to a practical explanation of what we're talking about here, okay? I'll deal with your questions in a moment. So I did say that The Usual Suspects is based on a true story. It's actually based on a murderer called John List. And we're going to talk about exactly his case and see if you feel any stirrings of intertextuality when we deal with him. That's him. That's him. Okay, let me do that. Okay. John List from Michigan. So think about what I'm going to say now and this whole idea of being nice and other things. So here we go. This is from Wikipedia. I think I'll put a link to that so you can read the whole thing if you want to. Okay. On November 9, 1971, List murdered his entire immediate family using his own 9mm Steyr semi-automatic handgun and his father's Colt .22 caliber revolver, right? While his children were at school, he shot his wife Helen, 46, in the back of the head, and then his mother Alma, 84, above the left eye. As his daughter Patricia and younger son Frederick arrived home from school, List shot each of them in the back of the head. After making himself lunch, List drove to his bank to close both his and his mother's bank accounts, and then to Westfield High School to watch his eldest son, John Frederick, 15, play in a soccer game. After driving John home, List shot him repeatedly because, as misfire evidence showed, his son attempted to defend himself. So what you actually see in that description is a little bit of an analogy with Chris Watts, where in the middle of kind of committing a crime, he sort of does some banking. You can see there's money has got something to do with this crime, right? And does money have something to do with Richard Allen? We've previously dealt with that maybe that was the source of his impotency. Maybe that was the source of his insufficiency. Maybe that was the source of his feeling of insignificance. Well, look at what it was with this guy, right? He's going to tell you why he did what he did in a moment. List placed the bodies of his wife and children on sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom. He left his mother's body in her apartment in the attic. In a 5-page letter to his pastor, note who it's addressed to, his pastor. That's who he feels he's got to answer to. Found on the desk in his study, List claimed that he saw too much evil in the world and he had killed his family to save their souls. He then cleaned the various crime scenes, staging, minimizing, removed his own picture from all family photographs in the house, tuned a radio to a religious station, and departed. Now, what is all of that telling you? It's telling you it's got something to do with money. It's got something else to do with, I guess, religious conviction, right? And do you think it's got anything to do with trying to be nice, trying to fit into a nice community? Do you think that crime that seems so heinous has got anything to do with trying to keep up an appearance? I think most people would say, no, are you crazy? But listen to what he says. It's how he is trying to keep up appearances, right? And what he thinks is important. So he says the following. At trial, List testified that his financial difficulties reached crisis level in 1971 when he was laid off with the closure of the Jersey City Bank. To avoid sharing this humiliating development with his family. So how did he feel? He felt humiliated. He felt insignificant. He felt he had lost all his agency. Why? Because he had no job, because he had no money. And so List engaged in the same routine and dress, keeping up appearances as when employed. So he'd leave home, even though he lost his job, like Casey Anthony, she'd pretend to go to work on schedule. He'd spend the day at job interviews or at a train station. He'd read newspapers and then he'd come home pretending that he was still working, right? Keeping up appearances. List diverted money from his mother's bank accounts to avoid default on his mortgage. As the year progressed, the family's financial problems became even more strained. So what's actually going on is this guy is starting to fall apart just because of money. And he's starting to think, how do I get out of this situation, right? He's kind of in a cage, but the cage is a nice community that can't handle an ordinary thing like losing your job or not having money. So as the year progressed, the family's financial problems became more strained. List encouraged his children to seek part-time work. But in actuality, that was to try and keep the family financially solvent. Now, this is the part that gets interesting. He was also dealing with his wife's alcoholism and her untreated tertiary syphilis. So that's going on behind the scenes as well. His wife is an alcoholic. His wife's also got a disease and nobody knows about it. And she contracted that disease from her first husband and concealed it for 18 years. So he's also got to act as though everything's fine to people on the outside. According to trial testimony, Helen had pressured List into marriage by falsely claiming that she was pregnant. She wasn't pregnant, but she says she was. Then insisted that they marry in Maryland, where they didn't require the premarital syphilis test mandated in most other states. her health progressively deteriorated, and she said nothing to List or her physicians until 1969. By then, progression of the disease combined with excessive alcohol consumption transformed her from an attractive young woman to an unkempt and paranoid recluse who often humiliated List, comparing his sexual prowess unfavorably with that of her first husband. In other words, in a sexual sense, List felt emasculated and humiliated as well, and it made him really angry, but it also made him feel very helpless. This is the bottom line. A court-appointed psychiatrist testified that List suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, and he saw only two solutions to his situation. What do you do in such a complicated, horrible situation? The one was he could accept welfare, which is the Chris Watts version of why didn't you just get a divorce? Or he could kill his family and send their souls to heaven. So why not go the welfare route? Welfare was an unacceptable option because it would expose him to ridicule and violate what his father felt. He had a very authoritarian father. But if you read between the lines, what all of that is getting at was this was all about shame and hiding weakness, and all about trying to appear nice and trying to keep up appearances. And you can only keep up appearances to a certain point when you can't keep them up anymore. And then what do you do? What do you do? Do you cheat your way out of it? What do you do? So can you see how you might say, you know what, your psychological analysis of Richard Allen, emasculation, insufficiency, it doesn't mean anything. To a man it does. I'm sure it means something to a woman as well, but to a man it's especially crippling and humiliating. And the feeling you get with that is also kind of anger. It's not just like, this is not how things are supposed to be. It's also a sense of deep frustration that makes you feel kind of angry, right? And List tried to get out of that cage, and I think Richard Allen did as well. Okay, does that make sense? So now we're going to deal with the legal process right now and the road ahead. So there's a great article that came out in Law and Crime, this article. Why it remains sealed, what do you expect from here? I'll put a link to that in chat. I don't know if his syphilis was cured. She had syphilis. I don't know what the situation was. According to this article, the prosecutor, Nicholas McClelland, said Monday that a probable cause document would remain sealed and would likely remain so for at least a month. What that also kind of means is, sorry, you guys can't see the article. It's this article. What that also means is that the affidavit is probably going to be unsealed in about a month. So just be patient. Maybe not completely unsealed and maybe partially redacted, but somewhat unsealed. It's quite interesting that he said the attempt to keep it sealed was unusual. We saw the same thing in the Chris Watts case. And a lot of people saw conspiracies there. Why don't we know what happened before it went to the sentencing? Well, because there were things like plea deals going on. There was a plea deal in the Chris Watts case. There was a plea deal in the Patrick Frazee case. When you have plea deals, you especially need secrecy and integrity, because when that kind of thing becomes public knowledge, and everyone speculates about it. And someone might say, that was a dumb idea, that was a really dumb deal, or whatever. The guy making the deal might be watching that and may have a change of heart. Chris Watts may have had a change of heart if he could see what people were saying. And he probably wouldn't have done what he did if people knew what he was saying. And I think Ali knew that. So something like a plea deal, that really absolutely requires the integrity of the investigation to be protected, because someone can make a U-turn and then you're in trouble. Okay. McClelland also said the nature of this case has some extra scrutiny with it, which I think is kind of funny language for this is quite a high-profile case. Then he said there will be a public hearing on whether or not those records are going to remain sealed. And I think that's taking place on the 22nd, so about 3 weeks from now. Then he also said, and this is important, the sealing is about protecting the integrity of the case. We've heard that. But then he says this, I want to have an opportunity at some point to explain the evidence and for that not to be tarnished or tainted. What do you think he means by that? What do you think he means by that? That I don't want the evidence tarnished or tainted. I think he means that can be tainted by rampant speculation. We've seen that in the Caitlin Armstrong case where a valid defense, think about it right now in 2022, a valid defense in any, if not every high profile case today are tainted juries. How can an impartial jury be found to fairly try high profile cases today without trying to seal all of these documents? If you don't seal them, you throw away your case. It goes off into the wild west of social media, and are you going to get aren't you going to get a tainted jury? I mean, it's inevitable. You're going to have wall-to-wall coverage about someone's guilt and wall-to-wall speculation. So can you see how reckless speculation is actually harmful in true crime? Reckless speculation. Law enforcement and prosecutors have to erect barriers to protect their cases against the long noses and long fingers of social media. It can't be allowed to become rumors and gossip. And the road ahead, so according to this article, McClelland, he didn't fully explain why court records may remain sealed, but what does he say? This article goes on to say, it's quite clever language. The task of understanding the machinery at play in Allen's case, which is the legal machinery, is shrouded in mystery. And then, yeah, there's some other stuff there. So I think it's likely that some information will come to light and the shitstorm will explode even further in terms of this case. But think about this. The very interest in Allen's guilt could come to his rescue. He could use that as his best weapon to argue that he's lost the presumption of innocence. So if you are on any true crime channel that is just insisting that he's guilty, and there's no sort of disclaimer saying, you know what, innocent till proven guilty, we are speculating, but we we remember that he could be innocent. If that's not happening, that is starting to contaminate your jury pool. In other words, law enforcement and prosecutors, in order to protect their own case, have got to leave a little space open that there's a presumption of innocence. If the entire landscape is like this sort of witch hunting army, well, then you can't have a fair trial. Well, you might have a mistrial. So that's how the true crime community can participate in upholding those sort of standards. It's like everyone is so like, we need justice in this case. Well, that frenzy can actually cost you justice. That sort of mindless frenzy, you can't allow it to become mindless, right? I say I've just lost like 20 people watching because they didn't like hearing that. So it's a legal right that the prosecutors are actually trying to preserve. There is presumption of innocence by basically saying we didn't put this information out in the public domain to, in other words, we didn't put it out there because we didn't want to contaminate the jury pool, but also we're trying to keep this a legal, we're trying to keep within legal protocols. Can you see how if a defense could say, you put that information in the public, and what that did was it basically made everybody biased. And so the police have actually got to, even though they feel very strongly about what they've done, they've got to protect their own investigation by not handing it over to the public because of what will happen. It's food for thought, isn't it? It's food for thought for where the public, where in a way, the true crime thing is going, and how we need to, in a way, self-police ourselves, how we need to manage ourselves and have some self-discipline and monitor one another and manage one another and keep our ducks in a row, right? Does that make sense? That even the prosecutors who want to prosecute this case, they can lose it if the Pandora's box is opened, which is why they've got to keep all of this private. So that's the legal road ahead. They're going to try and preserve that privacy. Good luck with that. Okay, so I want to show you one last image, this image. That's like on the ground in Delphi. And how often would someone drive by that and just really not notice it anymore? That, you can imagine, was almost in the window for 5 years. What did people think about that? Did people drive by there, go into the pharmacy, and then come out and then drive home? Did they just stop seeing that? Was it like wallpaper? Okay, let's have a look at some of your comments. Kay says, this has been great. I must return to work. Okay, thanks for joining us. How do we know that someone didn't report RA because of the posters? Do you think that's what happened? Do you think that's what happened? Nature Lover says it's different for high-profile politicians. They can say what they want about them in the press. Okay. Yeah. So if you're not careful controlling the genie in the bottle, you can lose your whole case. And if you guys have been, some of you guys have been following the Caitlin Armstrong case, that's exactly what he's been arguing, is that protocols weren't followed, and so certain evidence should be suppressed, and so on and so on. It's a real part of a valid defense, right? Jackie says Keegan Klein spilled the beans. He didn't need any sketches or posters. Jackie, you said that in a kind of tone that I couldn't come up with, so thanks for that. Tim Green says, considering there hasn't been any evidence, how are people already convicting this guy? Suspect, yes, but I haven't seen any evidence, any proof. He has been arrested. He has been charged. And I guess you could argue whether bail has been set. It's been reported that bail was set at $20 million. So all of that is taking in a particular direction. Law enforcement didn't hold a press conference because they didn't think it was a major milestone. Yeah, 20 million bond, yeah. I do find it quite interesting that the people who think that this is nothing, that it's not nothing significant. I find that quite interesting. Maybe I should address that. Maybe I should address that quickly. This was a tweet. I feel a little bit bad putting it up because it was taken down. I don't really want to sort of, the idea is not to embarrass anyone, just to show that there is uncertainty. That's really what that's about. Angela Ganot put up this saying, this is wrong. He's not being held on bond. But then later on, this tweet was deleted. So there is uncertainty on Richard Allen's connection or lack of to the Delphi murders. As I say, this tweet was deleted because I think there is a lack of clarity and transparency about Richard Allen. That's definitely true. Although lack of certainty is to be expected, even if there was certainty, we still can't be, nor are we allowed to be absolutely certain of anything at this stage while we're legally within the presumption of innocence phase. Does that make sense? Where we are now is a kind of the probable cause phase. And of course, we've been there before in this case. And remember Ron Logan, there was probable cause linking Ron Logan to the crime. And that was later, I don't actually know for a fact, was that withdrawn or that did they just admit that he's no longer a suspect? But Ron Logan was part of in the probable cause crosshairs of Ali. I don't know if it was withdrawn. I couldn't find reports that was withdrawn. I just know that he's no longer considered a suspect. Look at this headline. Dealing with Ron Logan. Owner of Delphi murder site admits to driving to county dump on day of teens killings. Richard Allen differs from both Ron Logan and Keegan Klein in that he's the first to be arrested and charged in connection with the Delphi murders. So the next phase is that prosecutors will need to prove Allen or try to prove Allen is guilty of specific crimes and his connections to them beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, have you guys heard that he's being accused of felony murder? Right? He's been accused of felony murder. And let's bring that up. Felony murder allows the defendant to be charged with first-degree murder for killing, even if the defendant is not the killer. In other words, he could be an accessory. But basically, I don't think what that suggests is that Bridgman is not the killer. I just think it's trying to broaden the whole thing so that he isn't let go of on a technicality. So let me put it like this. I think there are two ways to prove, from law enforcement's perspective, to prove their case. One is that the suspect was directly involved, or that he was indirectly involved. In other words, he was an accessory, and either of those could get a conviction, right? That's why I think it's using the felony murder rule. Does that make sense? In other words, I think law enforcement are being careful. You guys agree with that? In terms of the deleted tweet, if Richard Allen was held without bond, right? So if you go back to this, is it that? If Richard Allen was held without bond, if there was no bond, it would either mean there was significant evidence against him, like a confession, or which would lead to a warrantless arrest affidavit, as we saw in the Watts case, or that Allen was free to leave custody after 48 hours if there was no bond. In some states like Alabama, you can't be held without bond for more than 24 hours. But in Indiana, it's twice that. And obviously, that's not the case. Let's have a look at some of your comments. So that's really my spiel. We sort of ended slightly earlier. I need to go to sleep. It's past midnight. I'm really starting to feel quite tired. And says, in my opinion, I think RA is BG, but he may not have carried out the murders. What does Stephanie say that everyone's agreeing with? Accomplice for sure, maybe he'll talk. Can I give you my theories? I think the accomplice idea is that more than one person. So in other words, what is known for sure is that the Anthony Shots profile communicated with Libby, I think over Snapchat, on the day of the murders. And I would presume that interaction was kind of saying, let's meet at 2 p.m. or whatever, right? In theory, anyone and everyone who had access to that account knew about everyone else who had access to that account, and through inference could possibly know the identity or identities of those involved. Does that make sense? In other words, if you knew something happened and you didn't tell the authorities, that makes you an accessory. In other words, you didn't need to go there. If you knew who was using that account, that could meet that aspect. There's some people who think that there were numerous people at the site. I'm not one of them. But I do think accessory is part of this, but not in terms of in situ. That's my position. Jenny Friedman says, thank you, chat. Thank you, True Crime Rocket Science and mods. Thank you. Deborah says, I think RL is bridge guy, but did not. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Stargirl says you can get a location on Snapchat too. You can. Miami Lifestyle says, back from South Africa, can you give a brief overview of this case, please? No, sorry, I'm going to bed. It's almost midnight. It's basically in 2017, the day before Valentine's Day, 2 teenagers were killed in the afternoon, and one of them recorded footage from on their phone of a man walking and saying down the hill, and they were then found the next day, and it's taken 5.5 years to arrest someone. And the person they've arrested is a guy called Richard Allen, and that's where we are now. I hope that's a good enough summary. Yeah, Ozzy Jen, he was pretty senior guy, definitely was quite senior. Lucky says, I didn't know he worked next to the sheriff. Yeah, so I think I'm going to end off just showing you some of those images again. Can I bring them up? So yeah, this is a map showing where he lived and worked. So there's Richard Allen's home address, going to work, and then there's the county sheriff's office. And that's just 4 minutes drive, just 1.5 miles to get there. And you can't really imagine he would take another route. He wouldn't go that way. I don't think. He would take kind of the main road, right? There you can get a better idea. It's basically just across the road. Stephanie says, thanks for humoring me even when we disagree, and also for a live I can attend in my time zone. Yeah, well, that ended up being luck on your side. Although I must say, I actually feel quite lucky that if the power went out like 5 minutes into a live, that would have been really bad. So fortunately, it went out like at exactly 8 o'clock my time. So sometimes bad luck has a good luck side to it. Stargirl says, I heard a DR say posing can refer to a very sordid thing. Jenny Friedman says that. So Koi Cat says, are you going to be going into the catfishing scheme? Not sure what that means. So John Hammer, I think you were someone who said 10 out of 10. I can't quite remember. What do you think now about that sort of idea? So let's have a look at the poll. Make sure you vote if you haven't. 10% give Ali 3 out of 10. 17% give them 5 out of 10. 31% give them 7 out of 10, and 42% full marks. I don't think I would give them 3 out of 10. I don't think I would give them 10 out of 10. I might give them 6 out of 10. But also I don't know the case really that well. My vote might change slightly. It might go to 5, 4 out of 10, or 6, 7 out of 10. We'll see. I just feel 5 years is quite a long time. Like, I think the cops in the Caitlin Armstrong case did a pretty good job. Yeah. Maybe you could say that was an easier case as well. Deborah, thanks a lot. Corporal D, thanks a lot for that. Let's go through a last few couple of comments. So Koi Cat says catfishing is internet trolling. Yeah, no. I don't know what said you talk about that. That's part of the fabric of this case. I'm not quite sure what. Thanks a lot. Wow, that's like pretty effusive. Thanks for that, love, Tina. I don't know if that's in reference to me. Crime Geek says, I heard his DNA matched after he got arrested. I've also heard that rumor. I haven't been able to find anything about that. Like, as far as I know, he doesn't have a criminal record. So I have also seen something about DNA, that there appears to be DNA evidence. I think his family, sorry, the victim's family said there is DNA evidence. So we'll see. Chuck Jones says, no, they cannot. Any records and his aliases. Okay. Deborah says they are saying RA is not cooperating with the investigation. That's what a lot of people are thinking. I honestly believe that Keegan, that they pressured Keegan Klein. He's about to go on trial, and he's trying to make his life easier for himself. We know that he was operating the Anthony Shots profile. We know that multiple people were, and all he had to do was give a name. So wasn't it Keegan Klein who did that? Jenny says, get some rest. Well deserved. Thanks a lot. Cal Girl says, I'm curious about the alias too. Okay. I'm looking forward to taking you guys through some other information. I'd love to tell you what it's about, but if I do, you'll have another creator watching who'll just steal it and do it instead. But I will tell you on something separate. I do want to cover Amanda Knox, but I'll probably do that for a British audience in the middle of the day, our time tomorrow. So if you're interested in that, check that out. I'm definitely feeling quite tired. Stephanie says, most welcome, a pleasure to be scout leader. Awesome. Okay, is Terry Dean still here? Good to see you here as well with us. So thanks a lot for the mods. Thanks for all the super chats. Thanks for the new subs that have joined. I hope you're enjoying the analysis here. Obviously, more to come. Bear in mind, I've studied the law and I've written quite a few books on true crime, and that's one aspect that's quite unique to this channel as we deal with what I call true crime intertextuality, and you get a lot of insight through that. We, in fact, did that with the John List case, and you can see how it gives you so much insight. And we saw a lot of why being nice both explains how they couldn't find Richard Allen, and also why he may have felt trapped in a very nice community, in a very nice marriage, when maybe things didn't always feel that nice, right? It really kind of explains that. I hope you found this analysis interesting. Take care, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. Sleep well, stay safe. See you next time.